subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
Hello everyone and welcome to this video tutorial on how to make a formula in Excel. Now if Excel is known for one thing, it is its formulas. And being able to perform simple to very complex calculations in Excel is critical for beginners to learn and understand. Now there are over 450 inbuilt formulas in Excel that can be used on their own or in combination with each other. And these can be used to construct very simple to very complex formulas. And all functions in Excel are stored in the functions library, organized by category. Now, if you've never used formulas in Excel before, they can be used to do a whole host of different tasks. For example, you can use a formula to add up a list of numbers, to find the average of a set of values, to count the number of items in a list, make logical decisions, or even look up and format data. And I think it can sometimes seem a bit intimidating to dive into the world of formulas if you're new to Excel. There are so many of them and it can seem overwhelming to learn how they work and which will be the best for the task at hand. And this is really something that will come over time with continued practice. However, understanding the basics of how a formula is constructed will give you a really great foundation from which to build more advanced skills. Now, formulas in Excel perform calculations. And much like calculations that you used to do back in maths class, you need to understand how operators work in Excel. And an operator is the symbol that denotes if you are adding, subtracting, dividing, or multiplying amongst other things. And there are many different operators in Excel, so we're going to highlight some of the most important ones. So this first one here is the addition symbol. So if I want to add two numbers together, that is the symbol I would use. Now all formulas in Excel must start with an equals sign. That tells Excel that you want to perform a calculation. So just as an example of using addition, if I wanted to do 10 plus 5, it would be written out like that. The next one down is subtraction, so let's do equals 10 minus 5. We then have multiplication, which is represented with an asterisk. So this time we're going to do 10 multiplied by 5, hit enter to get our answer. Division is a forward slash, so 10 divided by 5 is going to give us 2, and then the next two I've listed out are greater than and less than. So these are what we call logical operators. So for example, I could say equals 10 is greater than 5. And Excel is going to provide me a true or false answer because this is a logical question. And it's telling me, yes, that is true. 10 is greater than 5. If I now do equals 10 is less than 5, the answer I get is going to be false. And then finally at the bottom here, we have something that's not really an Excel operator, but it's important for you to understand what this is. I won't go into it too much now because it's not going to make sense until we talk about cell references. But just for reference, this allows you to reference all cells between cell references. So just hold that in your mind for a bit later on in this video. So let's move on to talking about inserting formulas into cells. Now, as I mentioned previously, all formulas must start with an equal sign, as that's how Excel knows that you want to perform a calculation. Now, formulas can be typed directly into the cell or in the formula bar. Now, you can see in my spreadsheet here, I have January, February, March, and then I have the values 20, 30, and 10 assigned to them. And what I want to do here is I want to get the total of these numbers. Now, one way I could do this is by using what we call constants, and that just basically means typing in those numbers and adding them together. So I could say 20 plus 30 plus 10. Hit enter, and I'm going to get the correct answer. However, using this method of hard coding in constant numbers has several drawbacks. If you're trying to sum a lot more numbers than we are here, then the formula could get very long and difficult to manage. And also, if any of these figures happen to change, the formula would then need to be edited. So a much more efficient way of performing this calculation is to use what we call cell references. Now, the way that an Excel spreadsheet is set up is that we have a grid structure with a series of columns and rows. And where these columns and rows intersect give us a cell reference number. So for example, if I click just here, the cell reference is E2 because I'm referring to the column and the row. And we can utilize cell references in our calculations. So what I could do here is I could type in equals, and instead of typing in the number 20, I could just reference the cell C4. I can then type plus C5 plus C6 and hit enter, and of course it's going to give me the correct answer. The advantage here though is that because I'm referencing the cell, if any of these numbers change, it means that the formula is going to update without me having to go in and mess around editing that formula. So whilst that's a little bit better than our first example, it's still a little bit unwieldy. Again, if we want to add up a lot of values in this formula, it could become extremely long. So a much better way of doing this is to utilize the sum function. So let's delete out our total and use sum instead. Now sum is one of Excel's built-in formulas, and it is by far the most frequently used formula in Excel because everybody always needs to add up lists of numbers. So what I'm going to do is type in equals sum. And you'll see as soon as I type in sum, Excel essentially does a search through all of its formulas and finds the one that matches what I've typed in. So you can see here we have lots of different functions related to sum, but the one that I want is this one here, which is going to add all numbers in a range of cells. So you can double click from the menu to insert that into the cell. Now when you're using functions, you're going to get this little helper text underneath, which kind of tells you what Excel needs in order to perform this calculation. And we call these arguments. And the argument that it requires next is highlighted in bold. So it's saying, okay, I'm going to sum. What numbers do you want me to sum? So I want to choose these cell references, but instead of selecting them all individually, because I'm using the sum function, I can just select them all in one go, like so. And this is where that colon comes into play, because essentially what I'm saying here is sum cells C4 to C6. So I'm not having to separate every single cell reference with a plus sign. So this makes this function a lot shorter and a lot more efficient. Hit enter and it gives us our result. Now just to show you an alternative way of doing this, if you don't particularly feel confident typing different functions into the cells, you can utilize the functions dialog box. So if we jump up to the formula bar, just to the left of that where you have this little FX icon, that's the insert function button. So if we click it, it's going to take us into this area where we can search for a specific function. So if I know exactly the function that I'm looking for, I could type it directly into here. Alternatively, I could say something like add numbers, click on OK, and it's going to pull back all of the functions which basically performs this task. So I'm going to select sum by double clicking, and this time I type in the function arguments, which is exactly the same when we are working within the cell, but I get a slightly different way of doing it. And some people find this a lot easier than typing into the cell. You can see here it's already picked up cells C4 to C7, which are the cells that I want. Click on OK, and it gives me my answer. Now, an even quicker way of performing a sum calculation is to utilize auto sum. So on the formulas ribbon, you'll see in the functions library group, we have an auto sum dropdown. And this is going to show us the 5 most frequently used formulas. And the top one here is sum. So if we click it, you can see it inserts that sum function, and then it looks for numbers that are basically near where you're clicked. Now you can see here that mine's including a blank cell, so if I want to, I can modify this cell range by simply dragging that in like so. But if I enter, it's going to give me the correct answer again. So with all that in mind, let's move on to talking about the Bodmas Principle. Now, if you've never heard of Bodmas, and depending on what part of the world you're in, you might refer to it as Bidmas or maybe Pedmas, These acronyms basically define the order in which formulas are calculated. So let me give you an example. In cell E4, I'm going to type in equals 2 plus 2 multiplied by 10. Now, without any order of calculations specified, you might assume that you calculate from left to right. So in this case, you might do 2 plus 2, which equals 4, and then multiply by 10 to give the result of 40. But this calculation could also be calculated in a slightly different way. Start out with 2 and then say plus 2 times 10, which would give us a result of 22. So in its current form, there are two possible answers to this calculation. So let's hit enter and see which one Excel gives us. It gives us 22. It's doing 2 plus 2 times 10 to give us 22. Now we could make this a lot easier by using the Bodmas rule to tell Excel what we want it to calculate first. So this is Bodmas as it applies to calculations. Excel will calculate whatever is in brackets or parentheses first. Next, it will calculate the orders of square roots and indices. It will then do any divisions or multiplications, and if both appear in the formula, it will calculate from left to right. And then lastly, it's going to perform any additions or subtractions. And once again, if both appear in a formula, it will calculate from left to right. So let's go back and modify our formula and add in some brackets. So I'm going to click to edit, add in my first bracket, add in my second bracket. So what I'm saying here is that I want Excel to work out what I have in brackets first and then the rest of the calculation. So it's going to do 2 plus 2 first to give us 4, and then it's going to multiply by 10. So I'm expecting the answer here to be 40, which it is. If we jump back in and just move those brackets, so let's delete out where they are. And this time we're going to place the brackets around the last part of this formula. So Excel is going to work out 2 times 10 first of all to give us 20 and then add the 2. So in this instance, I expect the result to be 22, which it is. Now in a more complex calculation where there are 2 or more pairs of brackets, Excel will calculate the brackets first from left to right. So in this formula, we have 2 sets of brackets. It's going to do the leftmost bracket calculation first. So here we have a cell reference C4 and we want to add 100. So 20 plus 100 gives us 120. Next, Excel is going to work out the sum of the figures in C5 to C6. So C5 is 50, C6 is 10, so the answer there is 60. And then finally, it's going to do the division. So essentially what we have here is 120 divided by 60. So I would expect this answer to be 2, which it is. Now when you come across a formula where no brackets are specified, then the Bodmas rule will be invoked. So according to Bodmas, additions and subtractions are done at the end. As we also have both a division and multiplication in this formula, we work from left to right. So first we calculate 10 divided by 2 to give the result of 5. Then we multiply by 4 to get 20. And then finally we do our addition right at the end. We add 5 to give the final result of 25. And of course we could make this simpler by adding in brackets to let Excel know what we want it to do first. So let's hit enter and the result is 25. Now so far in this tutorial we've focused mainly on that sum formula. And don't get me wrong, that is probably the one that you're going to use most of the time. But there are so many different formulas you can utilize in Excel that I just want to showcase a few more of them before we finish up this tutorial. Now, as I mentioned previously, if we jump up to the Formulas tab and go across to Auto Sum, you'll see in here some of the most popular formulas. So let's take a look at how they work. So the first one here is average. So instead of doing a sum calculation of these numbers, I might find out what the average is. So I'm going to type in equals average. I can double click to select it, and then I can select my cell range. C4 to C6, hit enter, and the result there, this is the average of these three numbers. The next function is the max function. And what this will do is it will give you the maximum value out of a list of values. So I only have three values. I can see very clearly that February 50 is the maximum value. But just to show you how it works, let's open our bracket, select our numbers, close the bracket, hit enter, and it pulls back the maximum result in this list. The same works for minimum. We're just doing the opposite, finding the minimum value in a range of numbers, which is 10. Now, if we do count, this is going to count how many items we have in a list. So if I select my cell range, C4 to C6, the result I'm going to get is 3 because I have 3 items. And then, of course, we can use logical operators. So, for example, equals 50 is greater than 25. It's going to tell me that that is true. If I switch that sign down to say 50 is less than 25, it's going to give me an answer of false. And then finally, this moves into some of the more intermediate formulas. We can use something called an if formula. And the if formula allows us to perform a logical test and provide an answer if true or an answer if false. So let me show you this in its most basic form. I'm going to type in equals if. I then need to specify my logical test. So I'm going to say if C5 is greater than 25, comma, to move on to my next argument. If that's true, what do I want Excel to do? Well, if that's true, I want it to say yes, comma. If it's false, I want it to say no. Close my bracket, hit enter, and you can see the result I get is yes. Because the value in C5 is 50, it's greater than 25, and so Excel says, okay, this is true. I'm going to output the result of yes. Now, the examples there are the usage of formulas in their most basic form. Of course, these can get a lot more complex than what we've gone through here, and you can combine functions together to make really complex formulas. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about in this tutorial is absolute referencing, because it's vital when working with basic formulas in Excel that you understand the difference between absolute and relative referencing. So by default, all formulas are calculated using relative referencing. So let me show you what I mean. In my worksheet, I have just a small list of fruits. I have the amount of sales, and then I have a 20% tax rate. And what I want to do here is I want to work out how much tax I'm going to be paying on each of these fruits. So this is a reasonably simple calculation to do. I can type in equals sum, open my bracket, and what I want to do is cell C5 multiplied by D5, close my bracket, and that's going to give me the total amount of tax I can pay. Now I can essentially reuse this formula by copying it down. And all I need to do is drag the autofill handle, which will copy that formula to the other cells. Now, when I do this, what Excel does is it employs relative referencing, and it changes the cell references so that as I pull this formula down, it's using the correct cell references for that particular answer. So this first one that we did is doing C5 multiplied by D5, but as I've dragged it down, Excel has changed those cell references so that they make sense. C7 multiplied by D7 in this case. And that is what we call relative referencing, and it's the default in Excel. However, I could do this in a slightly different way. What about if I delete out this tax rate column, because the tax rate is the same for each fruit, so I don't really need this column to be there. I'm going to delete it out. I'm also going to get rid of these calculations. And I'm going to put the tax rate over here in cell H3. So now essentially what I want to do is perform the same calculation, but I want to refer to this cell in every single calculation. So let's type in equals sum, open our bracket. I'm going to select cell C5 multiplied by H3. Now if I just do that and close my bracket, hit enter, the first one's correct, But as I drag down, because the default is relative referencing, it's not working. Now if I double click to go into this formula, you'll see why. Because here it's trying to do C6, which is correct, but it's trying to multiply by H4. And because H4 is blank, that's why I'm getting a result of 0. Because as I drag that formula down, Excel assumes it needs to move all of those cell references down 1. And in this case, we don't need it to do that. So the way to get around this is to utilize absolute referencing and lock this cell reference. And we do that by clicking in the cell reference, H3 in this case, and pressing the F4 key to put those dollar symbols either side of the row and column number. Hit enter, and then when we drag down, we're going to get the correct answer because we've locked it, so it's always going to refer to this particular cell. That is what we call absolute referencing, and it's important to know the difference between relative and absolute when working with calculations in Excel. Well, I think that's more than enough to get your head around if you are new to formulas. Have a little practice, have a little play around, and I will see you in the next video tutorial.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get 4 free courses in Excel, QuickBooks, Microsoft Project, and Photoshop, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.